Welcome to the Real News Network in Baltimore. I'm Kim Brown. On the 14th of February this year, Donald Trump signed a law repealing fundamental checks against corruption, according to transparency advocates. Section 1504 of the DoddFrank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act required that oil, gas, and mineral extraction companies report payments made to foreign governments. But that is to be no more, as Congress eliminated Section 1504 last week. According to the Hill News website, this is the first time in 16 years that the Congressional Review Act has been used to repeal a regulation. And by an odd coincidence, on February the 1st, the Senate confirmed Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State on the same day the House voted to eliminate the transparency rule for oil companies that Tillerson, as CEO of ExxonMobil, had heavily lobbied against. And joining us today to discuss the implications of the repeal of Section 1504 of the DoddFrank Act is Corinna Gilfillan. Corinna Gilfillan is the head of the U.S. Office for Global Witness. Global Witness exposes the hidden links between demand for natural resources, corruption, armed conflicts, and environmental destruction. Corinna, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, if you would, could you please explain what precisely Section 1504 of the Dodd-Frank Act required?
Yes, Section 1504 is an important anti-corruption provision. It requires that all oil, gas, and mining companies that are registered in the United States through the SEC disclose the payments that they make to governments for extraction of natural resources. So that would include things like taxes, licenses, fees, other types of payments that they make to governments to extract oil, gas, and minerals. And it's a very important accountability mechanism, because basically what we're trying to do is shine a light on the billions of dollars that these natural resource companies pay to governments in order to make sure that people in the countries can hold their governments to account and make sure that this money is actually going into government coffers rather than being siphoned off by corrupt leaders, which is what often happens.
So the Dodd-Frank Act was passed in 2010. Is this when the rule was first brought into effect? And if so, what was the result of the rule?
Well, yes, the law was passed in 2010, but in order for the law to be implemented, the Securities and Exchange Commission had to implement a regulation. And so they actually went through two different rulemaking processes to come out with a regulation. And unfortunately, big oil, led by companies like Exxon, really opposed the regulation and tried it at all different points to obstruct it and kill it off. So it took two different rulemaking processes to actually issue a final regulation. That happened in the summer of 2016. So that was a very important rule that was passed last summer. And then unfortunately, the Congress, as you mentioned, took action earlier this year to basically void the regulation. So they didn't kill the law. The law still stands, but they did vote to void the regulation. So that means that it has to go back to the SEC basically for them to do another rulemaking process.
So the law that nullified this rule was sponsored by Congressman Bill Huizenga, who is a Republican from Michigan, on the 30th of January, and it was signed into law on the 14th of February. So how was this all done so quickly without any proper debate?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. I mean, as I said earlier, this regulation took years, years for it to come out, and then, with just so rapidly, it all went up in smoke. And so what the Congress, the Republican-led Congress, used was the Congressional Review Act. That's a law. It's a rarely used tool that allows Congress, by majority vote in both the Senate and the House, and with limited debate, and no possibility of any filibuster, to override recently issued rules. The 1504 rule, this anti-corruption rule, came out last summer, so it was a recently issued rule. So, we believe that the Congress, really used the CRA inappropriately, and especially given the fact that this rule is backed by volumes of evidentiary records, showing how important it is, and the fact that it's undergone extensive agency review. This attack on the 1504 rule is a huge giveaway to big oil. it really shows how much the Congress is basically giving big oil exactly what they want. And I think it's important to point out that we now have Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. As Exxon CEO, Rex Tillerson did everything in his power to get this law because it doesn't suit big oil's corrupt business model. They want to do all these oil deals in secret so that they can get as much money as they can at the expense of people in these countries. So, now, Tillerson is Secretary of State, and Congress has immediately sanctioned all these corrupt deals between oil companies and despots. So, I think it's no coincidence that all of these different things are happening at once and so quickly. It is a big giveaway to oil interests in this country.
So this transparency rule that has been eliminated or modified seriously by Congress, it was lobbied against quite heavily before and after it was passed, including by our new Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, then CEO of ExxonMobil. So why do you suppose that the oil industry cares so much about having to publish financial information that most people will never read?
Well, I think they very much want these deals to be hidden by public view. Global Witness, basically, we do research and investigations into the natural resource trade, and we've looked in several different countries at some of these oil deals. And what we've found is that oil companies set up these questionable or crooked deals with despotic regimes. And I can cite two specific cases. We've looked at ExxonMobil's questionable dealings in Nigeria, and particularly looking at a deal agreed by Exxon and the Nigerian government in 2009 to renew 3 lucrative oil licenses. And what we're finding is that the government has awarded these licenses to Exxon at a seemingly knockdown rate. And that really calls into question whether the country and the people in the country are getting ripped off. That means far less money that's going into government coffers that can help address poverty or provide educational services and other things that are desperately needed in these countries. So what we're seeing is that because there's secrecy around these deals and the payments that Exxon or other companies are paying to the government, that enables Exxon to get far better deals at the expense of the country and the people in the countries. Whereas if you shed a light on these deals, if you require all these payments to come out in the open, then it's really a deterrent to help stop these questionable deals, or at least to enable the people in the countries or others, NGOs like ourselves, to really question these deals and to hold the governments or the officials to account for the questionable deals that they're setting up. So I think that's why this was one of the first regulations that the oil industry went after, is because it benefits them to have secrecy around these oil deals, and they don't really want to have shine a light on transparency. I should also say that the passage of this important anti-corruption measure back in 2010 was a huge catalyst globally. As a result of U.S. leadership, we now have 30 countries that have similar transparency laws to what the U.S. passed. And as a result, many U.S. oil, gas, and mining, not U.S. and other oil, gas, and mining companies are already disclosing. About $150 billion worth are already being disclosed in other countries, and these companies are actually doing it, and there's no bad consequences. The sky hasn't fallen. They're still able to be profitable. So I think that in the long term, it's much better for Exxon and other countries and other companies actually be transparent about their business dealings, because I think this kind of secrecy and partnerships with despotic regimes can actually lead to instability, which can be bad not just for national security and for the citizens in these countries, but also for the companies themselves. So I think it's important to remember that this law is not just in the United States. 30 other countries are already actually implementing the law, and companies are reporting.
So what might the results be now that it has been repealed?
Well, it is the actual regulation has been repealed, but the law is still alive. And so, what is going to happen is that the SEC has to now issue another regulation. That is what the Congress basically has done is sent it back to the SEC. And as I said, we're very critical of the CRA and how it's been used in this case. But the SEC has to still issue a rule, and it has to meet the intent of the law that was set out by Congress. So we are going to continue to work and advocate with the SEC to make sure that a rule is issued that meets the intent of the law. And companies are going to have to continue to report. They're not going to US until a new rule comes out, but they're going to have to report globally. They're going to have to report in Europe. They're going to have to report in Canada and other countries. So this is very much a global standard. I think the big oil companies are really on the wrong side of history here. I think the global trend is still towards a global transparency standard on oil, gas, and mining. Revenue transparency. So I think that this is, unfortunately, we lost this rule, but we haven't lost the law. And I think that we're going to see that oil companies are going to have no choice but to have to be more transparent.
Your organization, Corinna, Global Witness, and others have campaigned very successfully against consumer purchasing, quote, blood diamonds. So could we see similar campaigns against so-called conflict oil and conflict fossil fuels?
Well, yes, and I think that the big question with big oil gutting this rule is, asking the question of what do they have to hide. I mentioned some of these questionable deals, whether it's Exxon in particular and their deal in Nigeria. We've looked at Shell operating in Nigeria as well. So that's just one country as an example, but there are questionable deals that we're looking at across the globe. And I think that consumers do need to ask the question about what U.S. and oil companies really are hiding. What do they have to hide? Why don't they want these payments to come out in the open? I also think that people in this country should be going to their senators and asking, why did you vote to gut this important rule? This is very critical information for people in all across the globe to know. I mean, that the natural resources rightfully belong to them, and they should know how their country is managing the resources and the revenues that are being generated. And so now we have a corrupt a Congress that's really voted for corruption and bribery by gutting this important rule. So I think that people should be asking oil companies what they have to hide, and they should also be going to their senators and their representatives and asking, why was this rule gutted, and what are you going to do to bring back transparency? Because I think that's very important for accountability and making sure that natural resource revenues actually benefit people in the countries and don't fuel corruption and instability.
We've been speaking with Corinna Gilfillan. She is the head of the U.S. Office for Global Witness. Global Witness exposes the hidden links between the demand for natural resources, corruption, armed conflict, and environmental destruction. And we've been talking about the repeal of Section 1504 of the DoddFrank Act, which allows oil, gas, and mineral extraction companies not to disclose payments from foreign governments. So, Corinna, we appreciate your time and your expertise on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.